we welcome you to the official podcast of the Fish Wrapper publication, bringing you story content to inspire, encourage, and uplift the soul. It's our hope you find these stories refreshing, thought-provoking, and motivating as you face the challenges of everyday life. So turn us up and tune your ears, and let's get started by jumping right into this story.
Joe, Ray, and Me by Pat Kilmer. Read by Lisa Hurst. Part 2. I missed my morning coffee. Ray didn't appear to know he was drinking cocoa. He was too busy jumping up between gulps to check things in the working area of the bakery, but no one had told Ray about the difference in the amount of yeast required in high altitudes. Cabeza was over 6,000 feet high, and that bread dough rose to meet it. It rose and rose and rose. Ray did what he called knocking it down, and it bounced back like a loaded Humpty Dumpty. Long before the proper time had elapsed, he cut and weighed and molded the dough into the bread tins. He placed the tins on the rising shelves, and by the time the top shelves were loaded, the bread on the bottom shelves was blousing out over the tins. He said, "Stay in there, you," and tucked the dough in. It bloused out again. Gas bubbles formed on top of the loaves. Finally, in desperation, he shoved the bread into the oven without waiting for the oven to cool for the proper temperature. While baking, that bread smelled grand. But in Ray's words, it looked simply awful. The loaves were a deep black brown. They had risen sideways and joined together like Siamese twins. He had forgotten to grease the tops of the loaves, so the gas bubbles had burst and fallen in ridges. Not all of the tears I shed were from hysterical laughter, though there was that too. Ray took it in stride. He calmly went about, finding out what went wrong. "The oven was too hot, of course," he commented. "But that wouldn't make the dough rise like this." He broke open a few loaves and studied the craters inside. "Must have been too much yeast," he decided. A search through the baking books verified that. "I should have read that fine print," he laughed, ready to start baking all over again. By early evening, he had turned out a second batch of 50 loaves, each a baker's dream of smoothness and even texture, each the color of ripe wheat. "Now, do you believe that I can bake, Pat?" "Darling, I believe," I answered. We wrapped the bread in wax paper and were ready to open for business. There is, in my opinion, no more arresting aroma than that of freshly baked bread. It will tempt a woman off her diet, jerk a man off a horse, and make a child wash his hands voluntarily. Our bread was no exception. Drawn by the fragrance of it, customers were waiting when we opened the bakery door. We had about 7 seconds in which to experience the thrill of our grand opening before we were stampeded. Mr. Walker, the hotel proprietor, took 5 loaves for the hotel. TG took 15 for the general store. In less than half an hour, we were sold out. 2 bestirred cowboys paid us a lovely and unpremeditated compliment by tearing the wrappers from their bread and eating most of it on the spot. "I never smelled anything tasted so good," one of them commented. Ray began to think in terms of a larger oven, and maybe a baker or helper. The disposition of that first batch of bread posed a problem. Ray had stacked it in our bedroom before we opened for trade, but obviously it couldn't stay there. We couldn't throw out 50 loaves of bread in Cabeza without arousing curiosity. Ray thought of loading the bread into our car after dark and disposing of it way out of town. But suppose someone saw him and wondered. Burning it a few loaves at a time in the firebox under the oven would take hours, and probably send out a smell that would make the citizens more than just curious. That reduced our alternatives to 1. After our children were asleep, Ray pried a wide board loose from the floor of our bedroom, shoved the bread under the floor, and pushed it back with a long stick. At worst, we might have to, for a while, bear up under the odor of mold, we thought. That bread never had a chance to get moldy. Mice came. In droves, swarms, bevies, or whatever mice come in. They got drunk on all that unexpected food and brawled and squealed all night long, night after night. Apparently they slept it off in the daytime, but come night again, that party was on. Eventually the bread was gone, I suppose, for the mice moved into our living quarters in the bakery. They played hopscotch on the beams and brought their children along for the fun. There seemed to be no place they couldn't get onto or into. We set traps. We caught mice by the neck, by the tail, and by the leg. More than once, we caught 2 in one trap. We kept them out of the flour, sugar, and other things mice like by fitting tight covers on the containers. That did not discourage them. They stayed on and took potluck in the form of any edible matter that was not encased in tin. Boots displayed his first interest in the baking business by dragging home a king snake. A boy had shown him how to hold the snake's head down with a forked stick while he slipped a noose over its head. "King snakes don't bother people, Mama," Boots explained. "They eat mice. We can keep him penned up in the daytime and let him out at night, and pretty soon we won't have any mice, and you won't have to throw away anything." He stood in the middle of the bakery with what looked to me like 15 or 20 feet of thrashing gray reptile curling around his feet, not seeming to think that there was anything unusual about a snake slithering around our rooms in search of mice at night. I didn't say no. I was too scared to say anything. Jean, on the other hand, couldn't get her mouth closed. It stayed open in a prolonged and terrified scream. Ray came in before either Jean or I died standing up. He listened while Boots explained again that a king snake was just what we needed. Ray nodded as though in complete agreement. Then he grinned and said, "But you know how women are, son, afraid of their own shadows." He picked the snake up and let it wind around his arm to prove that he was on Boots' side and would love to keep it. "But I guess we'll have to let him go, Boots. I don't think your mother and Jean will ever get used to him." "Women," Boots said, and removed his snake. But we had to find some way of exterminating the mice or move out ourselves. Finally, we took our problem to Mr. Walker. "I should have told you to look out for varmints," Mr. Walker yelled. "Here, take some of these," handing me some little green biscuits, "and I'll give you the loan of my 2 mousers." The green biscuits were loaded with arsenic or something equally lethal. I'm sure no mouse ever survived a nibble, but I lived in terror of Jean trying one. The mousers were scrawny characters with bald patches. They killed mice, though. In 2 weeks, we were able to dispense with the biscuits and the mousers and go back to traps. We never did achieve complete extermination, but we got to be expert at making a nibbled pie edge look like it had bumped into another pie. In the first 2 weeks after we opened for business, we could barely keep ahead of the demand for our product. Then there was a gradual lessening of the demand. Ray said we had to expect that. The novelty naturally would wear off. Only I hadn't expected it to be that way. I expected continuous and growing prosperity, not a high beginning and a low leveling off. Still, we were doing all right. We were living well, and more important, we were happy. We had independence and freedom. And look at the children. Had I ever seen them so content? Boots could roam the mesa and the hills, and we didn't worry. Jean was not penned in a fenced backyard as she had been in Detroit. And wasn't it wonderful to go for a drive and not get trapped in a traffic jam, breathe carbon monoxide, squint through exhaust smoke, and have our eardrums assaulted by griping car horns? Surely these things compensated for having less money than we had hoped for. With Christmas approaching, Cabeza hummed with business, and prosperity came to the bakery. We had to bake as much on between mail days as on mail days. The bakery did so well in December that January came as a shock to me. It was snowy and windy. People stayed home. And by the end of the month, we were still $9 short of the $30 needed for rent.
We hope you've been enjoying the story. We will continue in just a moment. We want to remind you that the Fish Wrapper is available by subscription. Each issue of the Fish Wrapper is jam-packed, full of story content, amazing recipes to delight your kitchen table, games, jokes, and much, much more. Don't miss an issue. Order yours today. Visit us at thefishwrapperonline.com or by calling 717-400-FISH. That number again is 717-400-FISH. Now let's return and finish the story.
Ray sold our radio for $10, and we decided on a budget. We'll set aside $1 a day, Ray stated, no matter what we have to do without. Even so, we lived a day-to-day, almost a sale-to-sale existence. There were days when, after we put aside baking supplies money, and wood money, and living expense money, there'd only be 85 or 74 cents left to drop in the rent fund. We made up the shortages, though, by substituting oleo for butter, salt pork for bacon, dried eggs for fresh eggs. We learned a few things about business that year. We learned that profit is not what you take in, but what's left over after costs. We learned that the owner of a business is last to be paid, and often goes unpaid. We learned that capital isn't only money, it's purpose and willingness as well. Sadly, we did not learn that capital is also hindsight, foresight, and insight. Our pattern of tolerating a day-to-day existence didn't change until the end of June. We ate well when we could, poorly when we had to, wore shoes longer before having them repaired, and noticed without concern that some of our clothes needed replacing. Then Roger Padilla, the school principal, gave a party at his ranch. The Padillas were an old Southwest family, and their home showed it. But it wasn't the lovely antiques or the thick rugs that made me start to think longingly of Detroit. It was the nice, cold ice, the gleaming bathroom, and the current magazines and newspapers stacked under tables. The next day, Ray put it into words. Yesterday showed me, and you too, evidently, just what we've come to, how much we gave up to come out here. We've been in Cabeza 11 months, and how much have we saved? We have that $40. Right, our emergency fund, in case we need a bottle of aspirin or something. And how have we managed to even save that much? By going without things that we ought to take for granted. The children are growing out of their clothes. Where are replacements coming from, Pat? Having a pair of shoes resold or the price of a haircut throws us into a financial tizzy. You make things sound worse than they are. We have as much as almost anyone in Cabeza. The people here are used to going without. It's no hardship for them. You and the children aren't used to it, so it is a hardship for you. I can get you back to the living level you're accustomed to, and I'm going to do it. We'll sell out and go back to Detroit. Ray publicized our decision to leave in the best possible way. He announced it at the post office. The first reaction was disbelief. Then we had a rush of offers to buy the bakery, but all wanted to pay us in installments from their anticipated profits. By mid-July, we had run out of offers, and Ray was beginning to look happy. He loved baking, but he said this life was too hard on us and his family. And me, I was bemused by the delights of Detroit. So we started scrimping even harder for our getaway fund. We thought of new products and tried them. Potato chips, fried in the same fat as the donuts, individual pies, jelly donuts, more varieties of cookies, all sold beautifully. At the end of the second week in September, our getaway totaled $200. We had saved $54 in 2 weeks. Back in June, I'd have said it couldn't be done. We decided to leave in 2 weeks. Ray told TG to reorder bread from Albuquerque. And Boots and Jean, realizing for the first time that we were leaving, were heartbroken. By the following Thursday, we were ready to go. The suitcases were packed, the bakery was swept and cleaned, and there was nothing to hold us. That night, thunder woke me. A torrent of rain swirled around the bakery. I closed our window, then went to check the children's room. I stepped in water and I heard it gurgle. Water was pushing through the crack under the door, hardly stopping to spread. I ran to our room and shook Ray. "Get up!" I screamed. "We're being flooded!" Ray immediately went into action. He carried the children into our room, put them on our bed, and lit the lamps. Then he went to investigate the bakery. 6 inches of water were swirling around the oven and counter and lapping at our suitcases. The water was mounting steadily. Ray opened the outside door and it began to cascade out. Meanwhile, the rain had begun to slacken. Later, we learned that we had had a cloudburst. Water rushing down the hillside and slamming against the building had taken the line of least resistance, through the door and into our quarters. The silt-laden water left its mark everywhere. The walls had brown scallops to show the depth it had reached. The furniture legs and floor were damp and mud-colored. Everything we had packed was soaked and stained. "It's a wonder you wasn't drowned," Mr. Walker yelled when he saw the place. Then he carted us all over to the hotel for breakfast. Mr. Walker must have lost no time reporting our flood, for when we got back to the bakery after breakfast, 3 of our neighbors were already cleaning up the mess. They wouldn't even let me pick up a broom. Mrs. T.G. invited us for supper, and the Walkers insisted we stay at the hotel until we left, as the bakery was still damp. I couldn't fall asleep, and went to stand at the window as I had stood that first night. It might have been only the tick of a clock since I had first looked out on the same scene. I began thinking of the people today, rallying round to help us, not letting our imminent departure change our status. Did I honestly believe that we were going to find a better life just by flipping a light switch in Detroit? And while I was examining things, I might take a look at what I was doing to the 3 people who meant most to me, dragging them back to a life none of them wanted to go back to. Though they would try not to, they would probably always hold a little resentment against me. "Treating that window curtain kind of rough, aren't you, baby?" Ray said out of the darkness. "Darling, I've been such an idiot. I don't want us to leave Cabeza. I want us to stay here. It isn't too late to change our minds. The getaway money will get us started again. Please, darling, let's try again." "I've been hoping you'd feel this way," Ray said. "If you mean it, I know we can do it. I've been doing some thinking myself. The bakery has been making money for us the last few months, but it can make much more. There's a real need in Cabeza for a lunchroom. The hotel only serves meals, and that's all Mr. Walker wants to be bothered with. But people driving through Cabeza or coming in on meal days want snacks. We'll open a lunchroom in connection with the bakery." Ray added a couple of provisos to our plans just to make sure I knew what was what. "We've made other mistakes too, cheapening our product instead of daring to ask a few more cents. Suiting our needs to income instead of the other way around was another, but once we're rolling, we'll proceed on the assumption that the bakery can make money enough to provide the kind of living we want. If we want shoes or red meat or a haircut, we'll buy it and make the bakery pay for it. We're going to order a daily newspaper and a couple of magazines. We're going to get a woman in for a few hours a day to help with the baking. You'll send the laundry out. I'm going to hire a husky young man to carry water. Our trouble has been that we thought ourselves into a state of poverty. From here on, we need to change how we think." I do not want to create the impression that new purpose and revitalized incentive oiled the path of progress so that we just slid smoothly along. There was a lot of uphill going, and some slipbacks. No slipbacks, however, so serious that we couldn't find something to grab before we hit bottom. I say we, but actually it was Ray who led, who always stepped out boldly and sank a grab hook before we fell too far. Sometimes it was an idea for a new profit-netting item, sometimes no more than a dare directed at me. Where does such a story such as this end? The day we had to enlarge the bakery and lunchroom? The day we could afford to hire a second full-time helper? The day the final nail was driven into our house? Maybe it was the day a bathtub and other bathroom accessories were delivered. Or the day the icebox came. But I do know that we emerged triumphant after nearly total defeat. Defeat of our own making, to be sure. But maybe that makes the triumph even more significant. We did not do it alone. We had the backing of an entire town, indeed, a good part of a whole county. But it was Ray's premise of presuming success and my willingness to go along with it that brought us through, plus a lot of hard work and heartache. The end.
We hope you enjoyed the story and will join us again soon when we unravel another adventure from the pages of the Fish Wrapper. We encourage you to like and subscribe to this podcast, ensuring you never miss a new episode. See you again soon, and may our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ guide you.